Good afternoon. I am Valerie Johnston, and I am the lead faculty for the Healthcare MBA program at TCU's NALHE School of Business, and thank you for being here today. My primary role today is as curator and moderator for this session. As we mentioned in the logistics, we would encourage you to post questions that might arise into the chat function. We will monitor those and hope to end the program with some of your questions from the audience that we can pose to the panelists. First of all, we wanted to do a quick opening poll here so that we know who is in the audience and that so that you know who is in the audience with you. And so if you could just take a minute or a second or two actually, and let us know who you are and what you're representing in terms of your interest in today's program. That would be most helpful. As we are looking at who is represented in the audience, I did want to especially thank the Dallas-Fort Worth chapter of the National Association of Latino Healthcare Executives for agreeing to host this program with us. We're having a lot of fun in our partnership with DFW NALHE. I especially want to thank Lori Thibodeau and Tiffany Capellas for their work in putting on today's program. And if I could, Lauren Gallagher is really shouldering the logistics and running the technology for us today. Lauren works in NALHE's Graduate Programs Office, and so thank you, Lauren, for your help with today's program as well. Before I turn it over to an official welcome, I did want to just take a minute and call on Tiffany Capellas. Tiffany is the System Director for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Christus Health. And I just wanted Tiffany to be able to give a remark or two to us before we begin the program. Tiffany?
Thank you, Valerie. I recognize that at this time we have we've got 44 participants on this call, and I want to thank each of you for being a part of this call. Such an important call to discuss how we respond in times of crisis, because that is exactly what this country is experiencing on a number of different fronts. We have the pandemic that we have all had to navigate, as well as now at this point in time, we have a live funeral service that is also being broadcasted for George Floyd's death. And so I want to thank those who are on this call. In no way is this meant to overshadow, but instead to really forge ahead and create solutions and share ideas on how we can rebuild and prepare for times of crisis. And so I want to thank our panelists and our moderator, TCU and NALHE, for putting this program together. And thank you those who have chosen to attend as we forge ahead and create solutions.
Thanks, Tiffany. And I think we can take the poll results down now as we begin the program. It is in hard times that we turn to strong leadership. And so I'd like to turn it over to Daniel Pullen at this point. Daniel is the John B. Roach Dean of the NALHE School of Business at TCU. And so if you would kick us off, Dean Pullen. Daniel, your audio is not working. Yeah, it's squeaking. Still not. This is technology, folks.
Daniel, we can hear you, but you sound a bit like a chipmunk. So I wonder if you disconnect your audio or hop out and back in, if that might fix the problem.
Thanks, Christina. I think Daniel is trying to log out and log back in, which is the right thing to do to fix
Is that
technology.
any better?
Awesome. Thank you, Daniel.
Okay, good deal. Well, in the spirit of crisis and pivoting and innovation, right? But yeah, I think it underscores the importance of the topic today. And I just want to say thanks to all of our partners with NALHE. And this really is a public-private collaboration across a variety of different sectors in our economy. And we have an opportunity to really talk about lessons learned and best practices as we continue to navigate a variety of crises that are affecting our nation and our world today. It's a real honor to be a part of the NALHE School of Business. We're a business school that actually makes a brand promise to our stakeholders every day, and that's to lead and to innovate at every chapter of our careers. We promise that to our students and obviously our external collaborators like those on the call today. We've had the chance to practice what we preach quite a bit in the NALHE School the last couple of months. We've had to pivot all of our delivery mechanisms from the way we instruct students. We've redesigned full courses, academic programs to meet the need of the marketplace and to give our graduates the most competitive portfolio of skills and aptitudes possible to join the next generation of leaders to help us solve these pressing issues for today and tomorrow. One of our flagship programs is, of course, our MBA in healthcare, where we are laser focused on preparing the next generation of leaders to really understand the business challenges and to be able to collaborate with the caregivers and other providers that keep our citizenry healthy, safe, and productive. And so we're really proud of the growth of that program and the way we've designed that to really operate at the intersection of the academy and industry. And I think today's conversation is just one more example of the way we're trying to leverage the power of a business school, not just to be a business school, but to be a real catalytic force for the good, not just the economic good, not just to improve business, but also the society against which we have the freedom and privilege to operate against. So I'm excited to be a part of it. Thank you again. I'm looking forward to learning along with you, and go Frogs.
Thanks, Daniel. Appreciate you being here. So we do have an information-packed program today, and I do believe that you will leave with new information and actionable items to add to the many crisis and critical conversations to be had. You'll hear from a number of perspectives today. From an academic perspective, we'll also hear from a large health system, from an academic medical center, and from a post-acute care company. But to lead us off today, it seemed appropriate to start with the evidence. And so I'd like to tell you a little bit about Dr. Mary Waller, who will lead the program off today. Dr. Waller is the M.J. Neely Professor of Management in the Department of Management and Leadership at TCU's Neely School of Business. And she's also a professor of medical education at the TCU and UNT Health Science Center School of Medicine. Dr. Waller has a PhD in organization science, a Master's of Science in Management Science, and a BA degree in petroleum land management. Before she began her academic career, she worked in petroleum, aviation, and software industries, where she was often involved in collaborating in teams under time-pressured situations. And so that experience really helped to motivate her program in team dynamics research, which she has been engaged in now for the past 30 years. So her work has been published in numerous academic and research journals and has also been quoted in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. Mary, lead us off.
All right, well, thank you so much, Valerie, for that introduction. I really appreciate it. Let's see. So the first thing that I'll do is try to engage in technology here and share my screen and switch to my slides here. We'll see if I can make this happen for us here. Now, let's see. There we go.
And you might want to speak a little louder, Mary.
Okay, how's that? A little bit better? Okay, so as Valerie mentioned, 30 years. I'm going to try to squeeze 30 years of research into about 8 minutes and talk really fast. So the past 30 years, my colleagues and I have published over 50 research publications on team dynamics, and we've done it by studying teams working in real and crisis situations. Teams like underground mine rescue teams, trauma teams, emergency medical teams, nuclear power plant control room crews, flight crews dealing with simulated crisis conditions, all sorts of different types of teams dealing with critical situations that they didn't expect would happen. And the outcomes have given us a solid, really body of literature, solid, consistent findings based on this empirical evidence. And this body of results have really kind of coalesced into 3 clusters of evidence. And these clusters provide us 3 key ideas of how teams can successfully deal with critical situations. So what we're doing is writing a book, of course, about these 3 key ideas on how teams can deal with critical situations. Today, what I'd like to do is share with you these 3 ideas and not have you wait for the book. In the meantime, here's my co-author for the book. He actually was my PhD student years and years ago at Tulane. This is Seth Kaplan. He's now a full professor of industrial and organizational psychology at George Mason University outside Washington, D.C. So here we go. Here's the first idea. The first idea is to set the tone in your team. And what do I mean by that? A lot of times when we say set the tone in the team, people think, oh, I've got to put the team in a good mood to deal with this critical situation. And when you think about putting a team in a good mood, you think, oh, I have to bring donuts to the first team meeting. That is not what we're talking about here. We're not talking, no donuts, no donuts. We're not talking about group hug. We're not talking about donuts. We're talking about setting the tone in a very particular way. So what are we talking about? Teams fall into interaction patterns when they first form within the first few minutes that the team starts working together. And these patterns are extremely difficult to change. They're very durable. But the good news is that you can shape a team's early interaction patterns and actually help a team increase its effectiveness during a critical situation. So how do you do that? What does the evidence, the empirical evidence here, and remember, I'm not talking about our opinions about stuff. I'm talking about empirical evidence we collected from probably hundreds of teams in different situations. What does empirical evidence show us? And here are 2 examples. The first example I want to tell you about is a study that we did of trauma teams during the pre-arrival period before the patient arrived at the hospital. So the trauma team gets together, and many of you are familiar with this. The trauma team gets together and they're waiting for the patient to arrive at the hospital. The patient is en route, and the EMS crew has called in the patient's difficulties. So the trauma team assembles, and the physician in charge is helping the team prepare for the patient's arrival. And the physician in charge has some decisions to make about how to run that preparation. The physician in charge can say, okay, here's what I want to have happen. You do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. Or the physician in charge can have the entire team participate in that preparation. We found that trauma teams that had pre-arrival communication that is characterized by a high level of communication balance, meaning that everyone participates in that conversation in that few minutes before the patient arrives. High level of communication balance, everyone's voice is heard, develops interaction patterns that are stable, that are then used after the patient arrives and the team engages in maybe situations that it didn't anticipate. those trauma teams outperform the trauma teams that experience maybe a monologue or a low level of communication balance during that pre-arrival communication. Okay, second piece of evidence, we did a similar study with flight crews during their pre-flight briefings. Flight crews get together and do a short pre-flight briefing before they push back and take off for their leg of flight. Same type of thing. Flight crews that had pre-flight briefings with low levels of reciprocity, the captain engages in a monologue. I think we should do this and this and this. Instead of having lots of reciprocity and back and forth and an even communication between the captain and the first officer, those flight crews with a low level of reciprocity actually perform worse later on in their flight when a non-routine, unexpected event occurs. How about that? So very consistent findings in very two different contexts, dealing with unexpected, non-routine events. So what does this tell us? Here's a takeaway from setting the tone. Pay close attention to those first moments when a team gets together and those interaction patterns that are forming. Avoid monologues, avoid interrupting each other. Make sure everyone gets to use their voice during those first few minutes and make sure that healthy interaction patterns form. Ask for questions and participation from people during those first few minutes of team formation when those interaction patterns are emerging. All right, and this works for new teams just getting together, and for existing teams, you can actually reset some of those interaction patterns, not all of them, but many of them, at the beginning of a critical event. That's the first idea. All right, the second one, adapt on the fly. Yes?
Couple of minutes, Mary, thanks.
Okay, I'm going fast. Adapt on the fly. So after the critical event has started, how do you adapt on the fly? In addition to watching the first few moments of your team, how do you adapt in critical situations? Here's some examples. You need to periodically update the team's understanding of the events because the events are fluid. You need to adapt quickly by engaging in information collection, task reprioritization, and resource reallocation. The situation is fluid and the team has to be as well. We found that in nuclear power plant crews dealing with simulated crisis events, and we found it again in flight crews as well. So the takeaways on adapting on the fly, if the situation is fluid, the team needs to be as well. Schedule periodic briefings, bring the team together. Are we all still playing off the same page? Do we all still have the same conceptualization of this very fluid, dynamic situation? And constantly match your activities with updated information, reprioritization, and resource reallocation. But know that there is comfort in the routine. Change is psychologically difficult for people, and you can take it to its illogical extreme. Constant adaptation is frenetic. And finally, idea number 3, find the balance. And this is the most difficult, I think, of the 3 ideas. You can think of this as sort of an inverted U. Routines and protocols versus adaptation or innovation is one tension that you have to pay attention to. Planning versus acting is another type of tension or trade-off that you have to pay attention to. The third is speed versus precision during a critical event. It's a trade-off that you have to pay attention to. And we found these examples in again, nuclear power plant crews and aviation crews and mine rescue teams. Teams with simpler, shorter patterns outperformed others. Teams with a moderate level of planning that found a sweet spot on that curve outperformed others. And fastest teams that put out fires faster and saved victims faster, and the mine rescue teams had slower, more explicit patterns and engaged in more helping behavior. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but they ended up being fastest in terms of their overall goals. So takeaways, finally, for these 3 tensions are things that everyone on the team, not just the leader, has to be able to monitor. routines versus improvisation, planning versus acting, and speed versus precision. And you just have to avoid slipping too far down the curve on either side. And again, it's something that everyone on the team needs to monitor. So summary, set the tone, adapt on the fly, find the balance. There you go.
Wow. 30 years in 3 bullet points, Dr. Waller, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so if you're, again, there is no doubt in my mind that these 3 short bullet points are backed by lots and lots of research. You can wait and read the book, or you can come to TCU and take Dr. Waller's class in crisis communication to learn more. So set the tone, adapt on the fly, and find the balance. We're going to turn now to the practical applications of this, right? And I want to first start by introducing Lillian Montoya. Lillian is the President and Chief Executive Officer of Christus St. Vincent. And prior to serving as the CEO, she was the hospital's Chief Operating Officer. And prior to that was the Vice President of Public Policy and Stakeholder Engagement. So she's held a number of roles at Christus St. Vincent. She is, of note, the first female CEO of the hospital since the original Sisters of Charity established the hospital in 1865. Her BA and MBA are from the University of New Mexico. She is joining us from Santa Fe today. Let me just tell you a little bit about Christus St. Vincent Health System. They are a Santa Fe-based not-for-profit healthcare system. They serve a 7-county region in north central New Mexico. They employ more than 2,200 physicians and associates with a $400 million in annual revenue. Thank you for being here, Lillian.
Thank you for inviting me. You know, it was really a really wonderful reflection moment for me to just sort of think back to what the last two and a half months has been like. And I thought that there would be a real benefit to showing a little bit about our journey as an organization, the transformation that we've experienced at St. Vincent. It is why we were able to respond as well as we have to date for the pandemic. I can honestly say, had we had a COVID-19 experience 5 to 7 years ago, we would not have responded as well as we have. And it is largely because as a culture, we've really transformed. We have been on what I call a journey to always, and I describe it to our teams as, I ask them if they've flown on a plane. And I ask them if they always want it to land safely on the other side, and we all do. It's not sometimes, usually, and not never, which are the responses on surveys that go to patients. And so our journey to always has been about always demonstrating the right behaviors and consistent behaviors that will lead to always results, not just in patient feedback, associate engagement, but in quality and in stewardship. So I'm going to show you in a couple of slides about this journey. I'm not going to even go through them. I just want you to see the visual of the stuff we've done, and then a slide of the results so that you can see it's a recipe. And I think that what I can boil it down to is when I joined the team 7 years ago, I spent the better part of 1.5 years just understanding the culture, where it's been, and why it was broken. It was really there was really an opportunity. And I think over time, what I best describe it as, we've come to this fundamental philosophy in the last few years that if you take care of your people, the people that work for you, they will take better care of patients and families. They will take better care of each other, colleague to colleague. They'll be nice. They won't be a mean team or a jerk boss, as I tell folks. But they'll also go home and they'll be nicer to their families. They'll be more loving with their children. They'll create homework space. So for us, that has been fundamental, is take care of your people, everything else happens. Because of that, we have been able to create an environment of what I call, describe as a psychological safety, that we are very comfortable reporting near misses and safety concerns and sharing opportunities for improvement. We call feedback a gift. You have to receive the gift graciously and learn from that. And we've embedded that within our culture. It's created bonds of belonging and identity because we have created psychological safety. It is not punitive to give feedback. We've also created an environment of shared vulnerability. meaning that the wisdom of the peers is far better than the wisdom of one. And we lean on each other for learning. We take that feedback, we apply it into our way of work, and it's allowed us to have significant improvements in quality and stewardship, for example. And then in the last couple of years, 2 to 3 years, we've been focusing on our higher purpose environment. We consistently and thoughtfully and confidently collaborate across the organization, and it's allowed us to be nimble. It's allowed us to demonstrate that we have developed trust. I like to describe us at times as an Olympic relay team, where you're just running and you're passing the baton and you're not even looking, because you know your teammate's going to get that baton and keep going with it. And so because of all of that, I'm going to show you 2 slides. We were able to respond in this pandemic that's underway, but it has allowed us through this last 2.5 months, is to really take to the next level how frequently we communicate, how consistently we communicate on message, and a far deeper appreciation for the need to communicate externally, not just internally. So we have put our communication on steroids. Everything from the executive team is on a group text. I probably hear from the team 2 or 3 times a day where we're talking about the census in the hospital or an issue at the drive-through testing clinic, as well as calls with the county manager, the mayor, and the superintendent of schools, and weekly meetings with our medical staff, executive committee, and weekly meetings through Zoom with our union. So communication has been on steroids during the pandemic. We had to quickly mobilize our organization into multidisciplinary units to do what our EOC, our Emergency Operations Center, has never done before. All of our planning and drills had been around a tragedy, like a car crash or an airplane crash, and we drilled on those and we were very good at it. But when you can't drill for a pandemic, so we've learned. So in that first week or 2, when we stood up EOC, it meant changing the way in which we do an emergency response. Everything from having 5 monitors in our conference center, each monitor capturing different national and local information, as well as capacity real time. We had to go very digital in that EOC to a level we hadn't before. And then mobilizing the facility to care for COVID positive patients, while at the same time ensuring that our people felt safe and confident in providing care, as well as ensuring that patients felt confident and safe in receiving care, whether or not they were COVID positive. And then ensuring that we were communicating to the broader Santa Fe and northern New Mexico that we stood ready to care for them. So mobilization was very key. We are in north central New Mexico. We have populations that speak Tewa and Tiwa, they're Native American, as well as Spanish, but we had to really ramp up on our ability to care for Navajo speaking populations, because all of our COVID positive patients came from 3 hours away in northwest New Mexico, where the Navajo community has really been struck quite hard by the pandemic. And so everything from having folks translate in Navajo to providing ethical and spiritual, making ethical and spiritual care decisions for this very unique population. So our lessons learned were you could never communicate enough when you're addressing fear, safety, confidence, and care. You always, always, always have to explain the why of a decision, because if you don't, people will fill it with misinformation. Everything from why are we doing a furlough to why are we tight on personal protective equipment to why we have cost reductions, or why haven't we reopened a clinic. Explaining the why, whether or not they like the answer, is certainly better than not saying anything at all, and really leading to a workforce that feels vulnerable. And then I think the other, it's not so much a lesson learned as it is an appreciation. We have a very diverse executive team, both in age, race, and gender and experience, that it allowed us to be really innovative about how we were solving problems and looking at all of the angles and being tough on the issues and not on the people. So I feel very blessed that I have a team that's incredibly smart, but wickedly funny and very comfortable leaning into each other. So there was like there was no drama about it. Even when we had to iterate and tell people something different every freaking day, it seemed on PPE and why we were changing PPE policy. But I want to show you a slide. So this is the this is our journey to always, and it's just a series of stuff. This is all the stuff we've been doing over the last 7 years. This first phase is focus on your people. This is focus on your patients. This is take the gifts of feedback from your patients. And then if you do all those things, you can focus on quality, engagement, patient experience, and stewardship. And I can tell you, this matters. This allowed us to be better positioned for today because we started this culture of discipline around FY18. So I'm going to show you this next slide to make the point. This is the data. So if you see here, well, this is what I call these years of shame, where we're flatlining on everything from patient experience to engagement to culture of safety, associate engagement, and our harm. The only line you want going down is harm. All of that stuff that we did on that earlier slide resulted in these kinds of results. And it has been impressive to see how this team mobilizes in this pandemic because we're staying true to the course that we've set as an organization. Back here, if you recall CMS 5-star ratings, we were a 2-star hospital, and last year we became the first 5-star hospital, large hospital in the state of New Mexico. Our engagement scores went from the 19th percentile to the 83rd percentile. So it's really a transformation of an organization. And I'll stop there. There's so much more to talk about that's more specific to the pandemic. I really just wanted to talk about all of the ingredients that we needed to be able to mobilize this last couple months.
Thank you so much, Lillian. Wow. I love the fact that you start off with psychological safety and shared vulnerability, not a place we often start. So thank you. We're going to move on now to our next panelist, Dr. Frank Rosinia. I have the pleasure of working with Dr. Rosinia as the co-chair of our Healthcare MBA Advisory Board. Dr. Rosinia is currently the chair of the Department of Anesthesiology at UT Health San Antonio. Before joining UT Health San Antonio, he was the Vice President of Strategy and Performance and the Chief Quality Officer at the University of North Texas Health Science Center here in Fort Worth. He graduated from Tulane's School of Engineering with a degree in biomedical engineering, and then went on to receive his medical degree from Louisiana State University Health Science Center. He did his residency in anesthesiology at the Ochsner Clinic, and then a fellowship in obstetric anesthesia at the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. He also holds a Master's of Healthcare Management degree from the Harvard Chan School of Public Health. You may be familiar with UT Health San Antonio. They are an academic medical center serving patients in San Antonio and South Texas with more than 100 affiliated hospitals, clinics, and healthcare facilities. Thank you for being here, Dr. Rosinia.
Valerie, thank you so much for the introduction. Marion and Lillian, so enjoyed the discussion. Everybody in the audience, thank you for making time this afternoon. Very grateful. I wanted to share, two kind of opposing experiences that I had dealing with crisis. The first one was what not to do, and I'm going to share that. It was Katrina back in August of 2005, and lived in New Orleans, was working there, and Katrina hit. I was part of a large management group. We had about 100 and some physicians, about 250 CRNAs. Large administrative staff, and when Katrina hit, we lost cell service. None of us knew how to text. We had flip phones. We didn't have collected email addresses for everybody. We all scattered to get to high ground, new locations for temporary housing for work. So it was very stressful, but set the tone, Dr. Waller talked about. We didn't set a good tone, and adapting was just getting to high ground and finding shelter, and the balance, we didn't find it. This produced a lot of anxiety, stress, poor coordination of operations. My learning from this was this is never going to happen to me again. So we righted things after Katrina and got our management company ready for the next crisis. that fortunately never hit. But when COVID came, this was the opportunity, to use the lessons learned in a different environment. And so I was really happy. We had utilities, we had like air conditioning, we had food. So, was starting off from like a much better position. My department is around 200 faculty, CRNAs, and residents. We work in a large university hospital, about 650 beds, and a VA hospital and ambulatory center. So we've got multiple sites of service that we're responsible for. And so the first thing that I did, and I loved what Lillian said about communication on steroids. We went there in a hurry. People need facts, they need information, and they need to be cared for. And know that you're there listening to them. So I started with constant, regular communication. It took two forms. The first was a daily call I did at 8:15 every morning. I set an agenda. I set, the time that people were going to speak. And when I started it, I was going to be alone in my office with this conference line. Everybody showed up in my office. They wanted to be together. They wanted to hear the news. They wanted the facts, the updates. It was dramatic how much people attached to that. And then daily, at the end of the business day, I would put out an update with all the information like that Lillian talked, all the crazy stuff around PPE that we had to figure out, how to use it, when not to use it, where to get it, can we have it, what do we wear when we're doing something, and what's droplet versus aerosolized, and all the questions we had to answer. So, the facts just were there. I put in the good, the bad, and the ugly. So we had regular communication. The communication included lots of facts, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then what I learned was the most important part of the communication was the balance that I was able to strike between, sharing these facts so people could get the straight, the straight business around what to do, what to wear, what our finances look like, and really the human part of this crisis, which is like, how do people take care of themselves? How's well-being part of this? And also, like, how do you create some humor in all this? So I remember some of the things that got shared more widely that I got a lot of positive feedback is that there was an article called The Ode to Toilet Paper. I don't know why people like that. I shared it. It was like very popular. Opposing that, I shared Henley's poem on Invictus, which is one of my favorites. And what I found is that people started sharing these emails outside of my department, because they were fact-based, but they had a really nice balance. And, when Mary talked about finding this balance, speed versus precision, planning versus action, and, the balance that I had to find was that people attached to was the facts and also the human component of what we were all going through together, in addition to trying to just get our jobs done, which was, take care of ourselves and our family and each other. So people shared these emails with their families and really across the campus. And, that meant a lot to me. And, so if I was going to, summarize, and I'm going to stick to three things, is the communication on steroids was huge. I kept it constant and regular. The good, the bad, and the ugly, I shared all that. And I didn't forget these were human beings that we were connected to. So that's my scoop on the crisis and communication. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rosinia. I especially appreciate that the physician who typically puts their patients to sleep is concerned about the human connection. So thank you for that. So we're going to move on now to our last panelist, and I'll remind you again, if you have any questions that have popped up about this topic and how it applies to you or in any other scenarios, please do type those in to the chat box. So last but certainly not least, Darren Zalagi. Darren is currently the Vice President of Marketing and Communications for Accent Care, Inc. Prior to that, he was the Vice President of Marketing and Public Relations for Methodist Health System here in the DFW area, and has also served in roles with Christus Trinity Mother Frances Health System as Chief Strategy and Business Development Officer and Chief Marketing Officer. He holds a BA in Economics from the University of Texas at Austin and his MBA from the TCU Neely School of Business. Go Frogs. Darren holds several certifications, two of which are he is a fellow in the Healthcare Financial Management Association and also is a fellow of the American College of Healthcare Executives. Accent Care is a nationwide leader in post-acute healthcare. They have partnerships and care models that cover the full care continuum from personal non-medical care to skilled nursing, rehabilitation, hospice, and care management. They are headquartered in Dallas, Texas, and they have more than 175 locations across 16 states. Thank you for being here, Darren.
Yeah, glad to be here. So I'm going to get a little practical as it relates to the communication piece because our two distinguished speakers really gave a phenomenal perspective from their seats, and I certainly don't want to rehash those pieces. But you know, the one thing I would say about healthcare and then crisis communications is the role that those who translate thoughts into words and then visual depictions for people to follow really becomes kind of an extended arm of administration and the clinical side. We all train together for these situations. We go through a number of disaster drills during the years. And it always puts us in a good space to at least know what our jumping off point is when something happens, and inevitably it happens in healthcare. I mean, I think the other thing that's a good thing to talk about with the broader group is that, you know, healthcare has some uniquenesses that always create a communication problem. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's cultural change, whether it's trying to go down the path of patient engagement, or whether it's a time-sensitive crisis. And I would say that, you know, the first thing is that we're not all centrally located. It doesn't really matter whether you're spread across one big campus or multiple campuses in a city or in multiple states or some combination of all of that. But there's just a general problem of trying to figure out how to get everybody rowing in the same direction when they're not within arm's length. The other thing about healthcare is that we all represent different skill sets. We all come together to form one body, but we don't come with the same frame of reference. Whether you're somebody in rev cycle or somebody as a clinician or somebody who's just a marketer like me, we're not necessarily coming to the table thinking the same way. But we all need to work in tandem seamlessly, because at the end of the day, there's always a patient at the end, and so that's the consequence of being a B+ is a bad outcome. And then the other thing is that healthcare has this other little uncanny communication problem that not a lot of us are on email. Not a lot of people are standing around a PC. So some of those very, very tried and true ways where you can just talk to everybody, if you haven't thought about that in advance, then you run into situations where you just don't have the capacity to talk to everybody. They're not in a place where they can receive something. And so going into this situation, I think, and knowing this is the setup, the way we tackled it was to really embrace the first really most important thing about crisis communications from a communication technical standpoint, which is you establish yourself as the single trusted source of truth, and you work hard to defend your credibility in that space always. And so that really means that it requires a level of sincerity, a level of trust, and a level of engagement for which you measure every single word that you use during the crisis so that you don't lose that credible situation or the credible position as expert. With COVID, that was really important because it got real personal for people. And that it wasn't just personal from the context of what might happen to me, but it got extremely personal when it came to what might I bring home as well. And so, to ask people to behave in certain ways and to follow certain protocols, given personal risk, requires a tremendous degree of trust and engagement with the people above you that they have put you in a good space. I think the second thing that we did was anybody who's in healthcare for any time period, we know that there's the why of why we're here is something you may call different words in different places, but we really rolled out this concept of your call to purpose. And it was a nice way of really just kind of telling people, you know, you're here because this is a life mission. And so, you know, during the dark moments of COVID, we want to talk about that. In fact, we went further, and that we very much got out there, even as a leadership team, and talked openly about what brought us into healthcare, and you know what was really kind of tugging at our heartstrings. And we encouraged other people to do that too, to talk openly and to be very transparent. The other thing that we wanted to do is to be very predictable about the rhythm of communication, and to err on the side of over communicating. And so every evening we had someplace between a 400 to 1,000 word message from our CEO that was communicated in multiple ways. That was essentially almost like an FDR type fireside chat that really got into some specifics. Specifics like PPE counts, you know, admitting when we were wrong on logistics, but exactly how we were fixing it. Admitting and talking very openly about individuals within our organization that had contracted COVID, and then, you know, what was it like to be on the other side of that? So some very personal stories. Along the way, we also hero made, and so you can't really start this personal conviction piece of your call to purpose without really lauding those who are exemplars. And so through multiple ways, whether it was in the message from the CEO who was talking about those things that were really important to him, we also kind of brought it down to the practical aspect of like who was just doing a great job and letting them tell their stories. And in an organization of 20,000 people, 25,000 people across 16 states, getting your name called out and your moment in the sun really, really mattered. You know, I'd say the other thing we did was, you know, we strategically took the opportunity to be active in the media. It reinforced a lot. It reinforced the notion of being a trusted expert. It reinforced the fact that you know, we were willing to practice what we preach. We would put that out there. We were willing to be bold with the things we said internally. We would be willing to say it externally. But also too, when we had the opportunity then to hero tell in those environments, we did that as well. And so we you know, we use that as a reinforcement mechanism. So you know, COVID's been it's been truly a rallying experience for accident care. We have grown not only together, we've grown together with those who work upstream from us, and it's really proven out not just the heart of the business, but the connectivity. We are better accident care because of the way our leadership came together, thought about communicating our vision, and then executed against it, and gave clear words to the organization as to how we did it. I'll stop there.
Awesome. Thanks, Darren. Yeah, I think both as individuals and as organizations, we learn more through the hard times than through the easy times. So thanks for those final comments. At this point, I think Mark has been monitoring to see if we have any questions. Mark, do we have any questions that you need to pose from the audience?
We have a couple, and I'll just let everybody know that if you have any more, there's still time to just enter them in the chat function. So the ones that we have so far, I think this is an excellent one, and I'm going to pose this to Lillian because it came up during your presentation, and I think it's a great question. And so this one has to do with how does a person's filter or personal communication style, or even their emotional intelligence level, or their ability to regulate their emotions, affect their ability to communicate in crisis situations, especially when you're talking with a person or to groups whose styles may differ from your own?
Well, I think back in this last 2.5 months, I had to, our team stood up the EOC, but I remember pulling in the entire leadership team to prepare them. And there was maybe 100 some folks in the room. And it's an environment where you want to make sure that you are really instilling confidence in the next steps. But I was also really honest about what we didn't know. The state had not yet prepared its own response. And so we were, and I recall telling the team, I said, look, we're not going to wait for the state to figure out what they need to do and how they need to do it. Our job is to take care of our people in our community. And let's figure out what that looks like right now, and then we will modify once we learn more. So it is about showing confidence and having that, and also demonstrating that we don't have the answers, and we're going to lean on the people in the room to get the answers. There's different kinds of emotions that are appropriate for those types of settings. And that's not the one where you're going to necessarily show fear or lack confidence or anger. It's going to be one of being confident. But it's also an environment where you need to show when your own feelings are hurt about what's happening to a community that's being that's going through a COVID-19 crisis, where you have multiple family members that have passed in the facility that are all related. So people need to know your vulnerability, because it helps them understand that it's okay to be vulnerable. And to a point that was made earlier, I knew my folks were going home to families who are on quarantine or sheltering place watching the national news all day. So when my people left here feeling comfortable about their safety and care, they were going home to families that were fearful that their loved one was going to get the virus. And so emotion's good, but it's also has to be managed. And I also find that even in those situations, I still write out my talking points at the highest level, the 3 or 4 bullets I most want to convey, so that when I'm in that setting, I stick to that first, and then it's okay to wrap a little emotion around it, as long as it's controlled.
Great, thank you. Next question I'll pose to Frank, and this one is really just kind of very fundamental. Like specifically, how do you calm the people who are on the front lines, who are really concerned about the risks and the perceived risks, the factual ones, especially when you don't really know, but the factual ones, and then the myths that are out there when they're concerned for their safety. And especially as we are now seeing kind of an uptick again, how do you kind of keep the organization at an even keel under those circumstances?
So Mark, thank you for the question. I mean, everything goes back to the front line, to the people that are like touching patients. And, so I've got multiple facilities. And so, I had to get to the front line. For us, that means we're touching patients in the operating room, at all the facilities, and I have to be with people. And they need to look at me as someone that's a resource and that's connected to to our leadership and to what's going on nationally, and because we all have friends at different organizations, and like that conversation needs to happen at the local level and then systemically with the daily communications. But it doesn't happen, and I don't have any the proper insight unless I go talk to people and I'm with them. So that means it's like not in my office, it's in the hospital, it's putting on my PPE, getting around, getting with them next to the patients, getting my car, going to the other facilities. You have to inject energy into this and really compassion under trying to understand what they're going through. So, that's what I did, because you can't fake that stuff because they can tell. And the other thing I found is, we had our dean did a great job with through this crisis, and we had 2 calls a week, and people loved hearing the debrief after those calls, because it was, what's going on in the state, what's going on nationally, what's going on with the rest of the folks in the UT system, what's going on with the governor. We're lucky to have the Vice Chancellor for Health for our UT system as part of my department. And so we got good communication. People were hungry for that, and it was solid information. But really, you have to touch the folks that are touching patients. For me, that was essential.
Okay, great. There are a couple other questions. There's one more that's specifically regarding communication in crisis. And Mary, I'm going to put this to you because it came off of your slides. The 3 tensions that you discussed, you presented sort of your set the tone, adapt on the fly, and find the balance, which looks like a 3rd step. But is that actually a 3rd step, or are those decisions about whether how you're going to balance between the routine and the improvised, or speed versus precision? Are those the things that need to be established up front with the team, so you'll know how you'll act in this situation?
Yeah, I think that 3rd step, they're not they're certainly not in any particular order, right? And that third idea, or those three things, those three tensions are items that I think everyone on the team has to pay attention to. And I think the key there is awareness. Making everyone on the team aware that, look, these are trade-offs that we all have to be aware of. And if anyone on the team sees us slipping down too far on either side of that curve, hopefully we have, like Lillian was talking about, hopefully we have a level of psychological safety in the team that everyone feels comfortable bringing it to everyone else's attention. Hey, you know what? I think we're paying a little bit too much attention to being fast here. We need to back off and make sure that we're being accurate, right? Or something like that. But hopefully there's enough trust and enough sense of hey, I can use my voice to make sure that we're going in the right direction. But it's more of an awareness of we have decisions here to make, and there is a tension here between these things, and we need to pay attention to.
So I do think, Lauren, I failed to mention this, but I do think we wanted to poll the audience quickly also and see from their own experiences in any sort of crisis situations, which of those three facets they find typically to be the most challenging for teams. So as Mary kicked it off, setting the tone, adapting, and then finding that balance that she's just talking about. Great, so the audience is kind of telling us which of those are the most challenging.
Wow.
Yeah. Mary, additional comments there, or?
Interesting. Oh, that's I mean, of course, that's fascinating for me to see. It's really interesting. I mean, it's interesting for me to be able to see a team like we were talking about before, to see a team with really low psychological safety, for instance, start out, let's say in a simulated crisis situation, and kind of, once it gets started dealing with a simulated crisis, kind of spiral down into a situation that it just can't dig itself out of. And so much of that depends on how it started in those first few minutes. Establishing that tone from the start is really critical. But to me, after doing this for so long and looking at the research, I don't know if I could pick one of the three. They all seem, they're all my babies. They all seem critical to me. But in terms of what Lillian talked about and Frank talked about and Darren talked about too, it's also things like culture and maintaining constant communication and having a holistic view on what's going on with the team and the organization as well.
Beautiful. So we have 2 minutes. We'd love to end on time here. So I think maybe I'll just close with sort of this one final question for the panelists, which is really an open-ended thing. We've spent an hour on this topic today. Do you have any other one single piece of advice that you would like to offer to the audience? We will never be shy, or we'll always have situations of crisis and crucial conversations to have. So Lillian, any last advice for the audience today?
I think that it's better for you to include more brains and smarts at the table than less. And for us, because we had been engaging our clinicians differently over the last couple of years by, for example, I have 3 physician leaders that now join the executive team every Monday for our meetings. It gives me visibility on the whole organization and allows them to teach the rest of us what we might be missing. And it went to a new level during the pandemic where our physicians participated in the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center, and they never had before. So they had visibility on the operations and then could really provide some very, very thoughtful and helpful guidance on ethical considerations and testing strategy. We got better because we had more at the table. It was awesome.
Great. And Lauren, if you want to put up the last poll, Darren, I'll give you the last 30 seconds. Any single piece of advice from the marketing and communications guy on the call today?
You know, I'll tell you something that was told to me as a first-year MBA in 1992, sitting in Tandy Hall by one of the leaders of the Communication Institute that was relatively new at the time. But it rang true with me, and it's been proven to be true over and over again. You know, not all of us have the DNA to be perfect orators, but we all can be effective communicators. And one of the most important things in being an effective communicator during a time of crisis is living within your bounds and being sincere. If you're not sincere, not only are you shorting your ability to tell your story, but people will figure it out. And so, so coming clean and being consistent, and never losing that space of always holding yourself out as a trusted authority and in the game with everybody, always proves to be a winner no matter what the crisis is. And that proved out true for us during COVID as well.
Awesome. It has been an amazing hour. I've learned a lot. I hope you guys in the audience found it worth your time today. Thank you for being here again. Thank you, Lori, Tiffany. Thank you, DFW NALHE. We hope we'll be able to do this again. So keep your eye out and go have brave conversations. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.